Scary telling.
As a new mother of twins, I was over the moon. Noah and Sarah were the most beautiful children I had ever seen. My husband, Jack, was equally enamored with them. We loved spending time with them and watching them grow. But there was someone else who wanted to be a part of their lives just as much as we did, Jack's mother, Martha. At first, it was harmless enough. She would come over and play with the children, doting on them like any proud grandmother would. But over time, her behavior became more and more possessive. I remember the first time I started to feel uneasy about Martha's behavior. We were all sitting around the living room, watching the children play, when Martha suddenly said, "They're mine, you know. I birthed their father, and therefore they are mine as well." I was taken aback by her words, but Jack just laughed it off, saying that Martha was just being her usual overbearing self. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the weeks went on, Martha became more and more insistent on being involved in the children's lives. She would show up unannounced and insist on taking them out for the day. She started to buy them gifts, expensive ones that we couldn't afford ourselves. And she would talk about the children as if they were her own, referring to them as my babies instead of my grandchildren. I tried to talk to Jack about my concerns, but he just brushed them off, saying that Martha was just excited to have grandchildren. But I could tell that something was wrong. Martha's possessiveness was starting to feel less like doting and more like a dangerous obsession. One day, while I was alone with the children, Martha came over unannounced. She insisted on spending time with the children and wouldn't take no for an answer. I felt trapped and uncomfortable, but I didn't want to upset her. So I let her spend time with the children, even though it made me uneasy. As the day went on, Martha's behavior became more and more erratic. She would hold the children too tightly, refusing to let them go. She would talk to them in hushed tones, as if she were sharing secrets with them. And she would stare at them with a look in her eyes that I couldn't quite place. By the time Jack came home, I was at my wit's end. I tried to tell him about Martha's behavior, but he just dismissed it as overreacting. I knew then that I was on my own, and that I would have to find a way to protect my children from Martha's dangerous obsession. The night it happened, I woke up to the sound of something creaking. I sat up in bed, my heart racing, and listened for a moment. At first, everything was quiet. But then I heard it again, a low, scraping noise, like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. I got out of bed and tiptoed to the door. I could see a sliver of light coming from the children's room, and I knew immediately that something was wrong. I pushed open the door, and what I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. Martha was standing over the children's beds, a crazed look in her eyes and a knife in her hand. She had already plunged the knife into Noah's spine, and Sarah was watching in horror. I screamed and lunged for Martha, trying to knock the knife out of her hand. But she was stronger than I had anticipated, and she pushed me away easily. She held the knife to my throat and threatened to kill me if I didn't back off. I tried to call for help, but she was too quick. She cut the phone line and locked the door, trapping us in the room with her. I was terrified, not just for myself, but for my children. Martha was pacing back and forth, muttering to herself. She kept saying that she couldn't let the children grow up and leave her, that they belonged to her, and that nobody would take them away. I was sobbing by this point, trying to reason with her. I told her that the children were ours, not hers, and that she had no right to hurt them. But she just looked at me with a crazed expression and said, "They're mine. I birthed their father, and therefore they belong to me." And then, without warning, she lunged for Sarah. I tried to stop her, but she was too quick. She severed Sarah's spine, leaving her paralyzed from the waist down. I was screaming and crying, but Martha just kept muttering to herself. And then she turned to me and said, "It's your turn now." She came at me with the knife, and I tried to dodge her. But she was too fast, and she cut a deep gash in my arm. I stumbled back, trying to get away from her, but she was relentless. And then, just as I thought it was all over, I heard a loud bang. Jack had kicked in the door, and he was holding a gun. Martha looked at him, then at me, and then she lunged for the knife again. Jack fired a shot, and Martha fell to the ground, dead. In the aftermath of that night, we were all traumatized. Noah and Sarah were both paralyzed from the waist down, and I had a deep gash in my arm that would never fully heal. But worst of all was the knowledge that someone we had trusted, someone we had loved, could do something so horrific. We told the police that Martha had packed up and left without a word, but the truth was that she was still there, rotting inside a black bin bag up in the attic. We couldn't bear to see her again, not after what she had done. And even though Martha was gone, her presence still haunted us. We couldn't sleep at night, afraid that she would come back and finish what she started. We couldn't trust anyone, not even our own family. And worst of all, we knew that our children would never be the same again. They had been scarred for life, just like us. In the aftermath of that horrific night, our lives were forever changed. Noah and Sarah were confined to wheelchairs, and we struggled to care for them in ways we never could have imagined. Every day was a struggle. We had to adjust to a new way of life, one where our children were permanently disabled and unable to do the things they used to love. They couldn't run, they couldn't jump, they couldn't dance. They were confined to their chairs, and it broke my heart to see them like that. Jack and I tried to be strong for them, but it was difficult. We were still reeling from the trauma of what had happened, and the long-term effects were starting to take a toll on us. We were exhausted, emotionally and physically, and we didn't know how to cope. We tried therapy, but it didn't help. We tried medication, but it only made things worse. We were at a loss for what to do, and it seemed like there was no end in sight. And then, just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, Martha escaped from prison. We received a warning from the police, telling us to be on high alert. They said that Martha was dangerous and that she might come after us again. We were terrified, but we tried to stay strong. We set up booby traps around the house, hoping to catch Martha if she tried to break in. We installed security cameras and bought a guard dog. We did everything we could to protect our family, but it still felt like we were walking on eggshells. Noah and Sarah could sense our fear, and it only made things worse. They were already traumatized from what had happened, and the thought of Martha coming back only made them more anxious. We tried to reassure them, but it was difficult. And then, one night, it happened. We were all sleeping when we heard a noise outside. Jack got up to investigate, and I heard him shout, "It's her. It's Martha." I was frozen with fear, but Jack was already springing into action. He activated the booby traps and grabbed his gun. I could hear Martha and her accomplices trying to break in, and I knew that we were in serious trouble. We tried to fight back, but it was no use. Martha and her cronies were too strong, too determined. They overpowered us easily, and before we knew it, they had taken the children away. We were devastated. We had failed to protect our children, and now they were gone, lost to us forever. We knew that we would never see them again, and it broke our hearts. For years after that, Jack and I lived in a constant state of fear. We knew that Martha was still out there, and that she might come back for us at any time. We couldn't trust anyone, not even our own family. And worst of all, we knew that our children were gone, forever scarred by the trauma that Martha had inflicted upon them. It was a bleak and desolate existence, one that I wouldn't wish on anyone. But it was our reality, and we had to learn to live with it. We had to learn to cope with the trauma, even though it seemed impossible. And we had to learn to live our lives, even though we knew that Martha's shadow would always be lurking just around the corner. For years, Jack and I were lost in a haze of grief and fear. We had lost our children to Martha's madness, and we didn't know how to go on. But one day, something changed. I woke up with a sense of determination, a sense that we couldn't just sit around and wait for something to happen. We had to take action. We had to find out what had happened to our children, and we had to make sure that Martha was brought to justice. We contacted the police and told them everything. We told them about Martha's obsession with our children, about her possessiveness and her violent outbursts. We told them about the night she had broken into our home and taken our children away. The police listened carefully, and they promised to do everything in their power to find our children and bring Martha to justice. They set up a task force and started to investigate, scouring the city for any sign of our missing children. We also hired a private investigator, someone who could help us get to the bottom of what had happened. The investigator was sympathetic to our cause, and he promised to do everything he could to help us. And then, finally, we got a break. The investigator called us one day and told us that he had found a lead. He had traced Martha to a small town on the outskirts of the city, a place where she had apparently been living for years. We were ecstatic. We had a chance to find our children, and we weren't going to let it slip away. We contacted the police and told them about the lead, and they quickly set up a raid on the town. It was a risky move, but we knew that we had to take the chance. We accompanied the police on the raid, our hearts pounding with anticipation. We knew that we might finally get some answers. The raid was intense. There were gunshots and screams and chaos everywhere. But in the end, we found what we were looking for. Martha was there, hiding out in a small apartment. And with her were our children. Noah and Sarah were both pale and weak, but they were alive. They had been living with Martha for years, hidden away from the world. Martha had been taking care of them, but in a twisted and sickening way. She had been using them as pawns in her own personal game of possession, refusing to let them go and refusing to let them be free. We were overjoyed to find our children, but we knew that there was still a long road ahead. We had to heal from the trauma that we had all suffered, and we had to make sure that Martha was brought to justice. But for the first time in years, we had hope. We had a chance to start over, to heal, and to move forward. And we knew that we weren't alone, that there were people out there who would help us every step of the way. In the aftermath of the raid, our lives changed once again. We had found our children, but we still had a long way to go in terms of healing and moving on. Noah and Sarah were still traumatized by their experiences, and they were struggling to adjust to life outside of Martha's influence. They were scared and withdrawn, and they had a hard time trusting anyone. But we were determined to help them. We sought out therapy and support groups, and we did everything we could to make them feel safe and loved. It was a slow process, but we could see that they were making progress. They were starting to come out of their shells, to interact with the world around them, and to enjoy life again. For Jack and me, the healing process was just as difficult. We had lost so much, and we were still reeling from the trauma of what had happened. But we had each other, and we had our children, and that was enough to keep us going. We attended therapy sessions together, and we talked openly and honestly about our feelings. We tried to support each other as best we could, even when it seemed like the weight of the world was crushing us. It wasn't easy, but slowly but surely, we started to heal. We started to find joy in the little things, to appreciate the world around us, and to look forward to the future. And as we healed, we also sought justice. Martha had been arrested and was facing trial, and we were determined to make sure that she was held accountable for what she had done. It was a difficult and emotional process, but in the end, justice was served. Martha was found guilty on all charges and was sentenced to life in prison. It wasn't the closure we had hoped for, but it was a step in the right direction. And then, finally, we were able to start moving on. We started to rebuild our lives, to find joy in the world again, and to cherish the time we had together. We never forgot what had happened, of course. The trauma of that night would stay with us forever. But we learned to cope with it, to move forward, and to find a new sense of purpose. For Noah and Sarah, the future was still uncertain. They would never fully recover from the trauma that Martha had inflicted upon them, but they were starting to make progress. They were starting to see the world in a different way, to find hope and joy and love. And for us, the future was still uncertain too. We didn't know what the future held, but we knew that we were strong enough to face whatever came our way. And as we moved forward, hand in hand, we knew that we would always be there for each other, no matter what.